This is TLV1.
The Tel Aviv Review.
Hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review, a program dedicated to the word, to the thought and to debate. I'm your host Gilad Halpern, and every week I'll be engaging in close encounters of the intellectual kind with writers, scholars, researchers, or simply people of all types and vocations who have done something to make our lives a tad more interesting. And on our show today, our first guest will be Professor Anita Shapira, one of Israel's most eminent historians of Zionism and author of a new biography of David Ben-Gurion, our country's founding prime minister. It has just been published in English by Yale University Press, and she'll be here to tell us all about David Ben-Gurion, the man.
Thank you.
So Ben-Gurion is such a central figure in the history of Israel and the Jews in the 20th century that several biographies have been written about him. His personality and policies featured in hundreds, if not thousands, of historical studies. So my question to you, Anita, when you set off to write this book, what did you have in mind? What were you seeking to accomplish?
Well, actually, I thought, that Ben-Gurion featured in many of my books, and he was always the eminence gris behind the scenes. And he was the most important figure, even when he was not the hero. In my book about Yigal Allon, about Berl Katzenelson, in my study about the clashes during the War of Independence, but it was always a figure on the side. Mm-hmm. And I thought that it's high time that I take on the challenge and try to write about Ben-Gurion. Why didn't I choose him earlier?
Exactly. You arrived at Ben-Gurion after decades of your career. Well, exactly. Why wasn't it the other way around? Why didn't you start with Ben-Gurion and then went down, as it were, to the others?
Well, the fact is that I always cherished more writing about figures that seemed to me weak, full of doubts, very, very given to failure. And Ben-Gurion seemed too strong, too resolute, too much of a figure that did not fit the idea of what would be interesting to write about. Mm-hmm. But
because that was the persona that he tried to exhibit, right?
Exactly.
That's exactly what he wanted people to think.
Exactly. So what I wanted to do in this short biography was to uncover the unknown Ben-Gurion. Mm-hmm. The Ben-Gurion persona that was not in the public domain, mm-hmm. that he tried to hide all the time.
Yes, perhaps as opposed to the other biographies, this is not necessarily or not only a political biography of Ben-Gurion. You focus a lot about Ben-Gurion, the man.
That's
which,
right.
As we all know, the conventional wisdom, which is what you just said, the preconceptions that you had about him is of a very adamant, very resolute, very driven political figure. So when you unpacked his personality, what were the contradictions that emerged?
Well, it seemed that it was his aim to keep his more sensitive, more vulnerable personality hidden. He wanted to appear to us as what he thought a leader should be. He should be very determined, very obstinate, very self-assured, and behind it there was a man that was driven by doubts and by sympathies and by weaknesses that he tried to hide from us.
Can you give us an example about some historical junction where his doubts and his...
Okay.
Mhm.
You know, Golda Meir, when I interviewed her in 76, I think, she was already out of office, and she told me, Ben-Gurion always gave us the feeling that he did not need any of us. But when I read the documents and the letters from 48, on the eve of the establishment of the state, when Ben-Gurion had to decide whether to go to war and establish the state or to wait, maybe there would be another opportunity, he uncovered to her his weaknesses, his feeling of doubts. Will the weapons arrive on time? Will we have a chance to win? And you see these doubts very clearly. And this was a completely different person. Another example, his attitude to the Holocaust. He was so much vilified that he did not show any sensitivity to the Holocaust. And indeed, even myself has written about it.
Mm-hmm.
But now I know that this was the external persona. In his letter to his beloved in the United States, he uncovered his feelings, his sense of helplessness, his sense of rage. And this was a completely different person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, his approach to the Holocaust that you just said, perhaps the more well-known one, is that everything... It's an example of how everything was inferior to the grand political cause. Yeah. The Holocaust was a tragedy, but at the end of the day, it would in some way help the Zionist cause. And so you're saying that in his letters he showed the more intimate and more and less self-assured man. Was he in this way a family man as well? That his family was just in the background, and he was married, as it were, to Zionism rather than to Paula?
He was married to Paula, and at the beginning this was a great love, but later on he was sometimes infidel, and what's more, Paula was never a companion. Mm-hmm. Paula took care of him, of his hygiene, of his eating the right things, and so on and so forth. But she was never somebody he could converse with. And as he grew older, on the one hand, he became more attached to her. When he lived with her in Sde care, he was very, very annoyed when she left him for a few days and went to Tel Aviv. And he would write her telegrams. Please, when are you coming back? And so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. So, on the other hand, he was a family man, because when his son, Amos Ben-Gurion, came to him and announced that he is going to marry a girl, and this girl is not Jewish, he wrote to Paula, Paula, please don't attack him too much. Only softly will do the trick. And Paula, of course, attacked him and nagged him and so on and so forth. And Ben-Gurion accepted this daughter-in-law that was not Jewish.
So would you say that what Golda told you about his attitude towards them, that they always felt that he didn't need them, Was this different from his attitude towards his family members?
I am sure. Even though, I interviewed one of his grandsons, the eldest one, and he said that the family was divided. Part of the family thought that he was impossible, and the other part of the family adored him. So it depended.
Just like his politics, he was very divisive,
that's
right?
That's right. It's so funny because I think that Amos Ben-Gurion's family loved him very much. Renana also loved him very much. I am not sure about Geula, the eldest daughter, because she took the side of her mother, and I think that there came the criticism from.
I want to take you back to the younger Ben-Gurion, to 1906. He was a young man, just arrived in Palestine from a very small town in Poland, and gradually worked his way up to become the leader of the Zionist movement, and then, of course, the founding leader of the State of Israel. When he landed in 1906 in Palestine, did he already know that he was going to be the leader of the Jews in Palestine?
No, but it was a short while after that he wrote his father that he does not intend to be a worker in the fields. He is going to be a leader of the workers. So he had this feeling that he was a man with a mission, and also he did not like too much to work too hard. So these are two sides of the same coin.
Right, but you said when you're a 20-year-old man and you decide that you want to be a leader, you've got to work your way up in such a way. You have to be so self-assured, and that takes us back to what we think we know of Ben-Gurion. And later on, about 20 years later, he would start this arms wrestling with Chaim Weizmann, the godfather of the Zionist cause. It took a lot of chutzpah.
Well, when he started, he was not a very important figure in Palestine. Nevertheless, even then, he already had an inkling that he's going to be a historical figure. We know that because he asked his father to keep his letters from that period. And this was something that a youth of 20 years old usually does not do. On the other hand, he was really of no consequence at that time. Really of no consequence.
So when was the turning point? When did he start to become this, the face of the Yishuv?
I would say not before 33. Then he was then he won the big election in Poland, in Eastern Europe, and the Labour Party became the hegemonic force in the Zionist movement.
Even though he had been the chairman of the Histadrut for about 15 years before.
Yes, but even then he was still even not the uncontested leader of the Yishuv, not to mention the fact that he was hardly known outside the Yishuv. Mm-hmm. And actually, the world at large did not realize that Ben-Gurion is important until 47, 48.
Right. So let's go back to 1933.
Okay.
What was how did it become? What was the transformation from a nobody to a somebody to a leader? Was it just that he benefited from the growing hegemony of the Labour and he just happened to be leading it, or was it thanks to him mainly?
Well, I think that he was instrumental in winning the elections, and I describe it in the book. And later on, he showed a maturing process. He started negotiations with the Arabs. He started talking with the High Commissioner, he understood that he needs a coalition with the religious, with the Mizrahi party since 1935. He learned to make compromises, which he did not know before that. And as a result of that, his fame grew. He became a leader. But Weizmann, whom you mentioned, would not give him recognition. He was already the chairman of the Zionist organization. Nevertheless, the Zionist executive. Nevertheless, Weizmann, whom he helped to re-elect as president, would not acknowledge that they should be equal. And he would not give him the privilege to participate in his negotiations. He kept it out of the first rank as long as he could. We always think about Weizmann as being the victim of Ben-Gurion because Weizmann was articulate, good-looking and tall.
And a gentleman.
And a wonderful gentleman, and he was also urbane. And Ben-Gurion was short and noisy and talked too much and not always talked sense and so on and so forth. And he had his, what I call, volcanic eruptions of rage and so on and so forth. So we tend to think that Weizmann was the victim of Ben-Gurion. However, the truth is that Weizmann treated Ben-Gurion disdainfully, even after Ben-Gurion was the chairman of the Zionist executive. And one must say that Ben-Gurion, until the very end, at least in writing, you won't find a word of dismissal towards Weizmann. He treated him as if he was the historical leader of the Zionist
But it wasn't
movement.
only a clash of personalities, because they also represented two very different outlooks towards what Zionism should be and how it should be carried out. So when was this transformation? How did it really occur? Because it wasn't just the two of them in the two separate camps of Ben-Gurion loyalists and Weizmann loyalists. There were also people who believed in two separate ways, and at the end of the day, the balance was tilted in Ben-Gurion's favor.
First of all, during the Second World War, very early on, Ben-Gurion came to the conclusion that it's time to change orientation from Britain to the United States. And he wrote in a letter to his daughter, very early on, I think in 1941, if I remember correctly, that after the war there are going to be two great powers, the United States and the Soviet Union.
It was very precocious for that time.
Yes, and Weizmann would not agree to that. There are letters from him. He says, Ben-Gurion got crazy. He thinks that after the war it's going to be like that. So it's very dangerous for a historical figure to write letters, because then you can see that he was not always right. So first of all, it's a question of orientation. Second, it's a question of what kind of politics you do. Weizmann was the charmer, was the person that one-on-one was the best.
Yeah, it worked with Balfour.
It
very
worked
well.
with all the
Yeah.
Englishmen. Ben-Gurion, on the other hand, understood politics as the politics of the masses. You have to activate the masses. He was a revolutionary, if you wish. And modern politics depend on masses following you, masses giving you support. And for Weizmann, this was something unheard of. And the third point was that Ben-Gurion was short of breath. He wanted Zionism to be realized as soon as possible. since the Second World War. And Weizmann was an evolutionist, and he remained an evolutionist to the very end. So you can see that these two figures were on a clash.
Yeah, which brings me to my probably last question, because we will have to wrap up soon, Anita. What would you say is Ben-Gurion's most influential policy decision in the long term? His single most indelible mark on the course of history? Well,
first of all, it's the establishment of the State of Israel. The decision to pronounce the establishment of the state, the proclamation
in May 48.
In May 48 was something that today seems to us obvious. It was not obvious at all when the Americans cautioned us, you are going to lose the war and we are not going to bail you out. When the army leaders tell him that the chances are 50%. So at that time, when about half the provisional government is hesitant, he had to swing the vote in his direction. And he was the man that understood the historical opportunity. And when you said at the beginning that he reminds us of Churchill and de Gaulle and
Chiang
Kai-shek, etc., you did not mention Lenin. But he learned one thing from Lenin, that the historical opportunity has to be had to be used. If you don't use it, it slips away. And this was something that he had in common with the great revolutionaries of the 20th century.
And it came into play all along the way, not just in 1948.
That's right.
Yeah, you mentioned a few other examples where he said, okay, it's now or never.
Yes, that's right. And this was one of his strongest points. When Golda Meir said, whenever I contradicted him, at the end he proved right. This was exactly this feeling of a historical opportunity that he would not let slip away.
Was there some grave error of judgment in one of his decisions that you can retract?
Well, I still don't know whether he should have, whether he could have a constitution in Israel in the early days of the state. He was hesitant about it, and he, as usual, when he did not want something, he projected the feeling that he doesn't have the coalition needed for such a decision. And the truth is that maybe he did not have such a coalition. But I think that in the long run, this was a mistake. And had we had a constitution, maybe some of the ills of the present time could have been avoided.
Right.
But on the other hand, we have a saying that says, either you don't need it, the constitution, or it doesn't help,
right.
Which is also true.
Who knows? All right, Professor Anita Shapira, a historian of Zionism and the author of numerous books, most recently a biography of Ben-Gurion that was published by Yale University Press. Thank you so much for coming in today.
Thank you.